My mother-in-law screamed as the police handcuffed her favorite son. She pointed a shaking finger at me and called me a monster for starving them. I just stood there in my driveway holding the deed to my house and a receipt for $20,000 of ruined caviar. They wanted a private chef for free, and they thought family meant they could rob me blind. Instead of a five-star meal, they got a criminal record. My name is Nicole, and I am 34 years old. I am the owner of a high-end catering business in Chicago called Nicole's Table. People think cooking is just about following recipes, but for me, it is a military operation of precision and respect. But nothing prepared me for the war zone my own kitchen would become. If you have ever had family who treated your hard work like their personal playground, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to lock up your own food in your own house just to survive. It was 5 in the morning and the house was dead silent. I tiptoed downstairs, trying not to wake my husband Jason or his family sleeping in the guest wing. My kitchen is not just a room. It is a licensed commercial workspace. I have stainless steel counters, industrial ventilation, and a sub-zero fridge that costs more than my first car. Today was the biggest day of my career. I had a tasting menu for the mayor's charity gala, and every second counted. I washed my hands for 20 seconds, put on my pristine white apron, and took a deep breath. I walked to the commercial fridge ready to start prepping. I reached for the top shelf where I kept the premium inventory. My hand grabbed nothing but cold air. My heart stopped. The clear plastic bin labeled "Client Order Do Not Touch" was gone. I blinked, thinking I was still asleep. That bin contained 2 pounds of A5 Japanese Wagyu beef marbled like a work of art. It also held 3 pounds of fresh crayfish flown in overnight from Louisiana. The total value was over $800. I searched the other shelves. I checked the vegetable crisper. Nothing. Panic started to rise in my throat like bile. I spun around, and that is when I saw it. The island counter, usually sanitized and spotless, was covered in a layer of grease. Empty wine bottles were knocked over on my cutting board. And there, sitting in my stainless steel sink, was a crime scene. I walked over my legs feeling heavy. A dirty plate sat in the sink with half-eaten chunks of meat. They had not just eaten it, they had destroyed it. My beautiful buttery A5 Wagyu had been fried until it looked like a hockey puck. It was burnt to a crisp, well done, and dry as leather. Beside it lay the shells of the crayfish, cracked open like cheap pistachios and sucked dry. I picked up a fork from the mess. It was covered in dried ketchup. Ketchup on Wagyu beef. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from pure white-hot rage. This was not just a midnight snack. This was theft. And worse, it was a culinary insult. I looked at the grease smeared on my expensive German knives. I looked at the sticky residue on the floor. My mother-in-law Patricia and her daughter Brittany had moved in 3 weeks ago after losing their townhouse. I tried to be gracious. I tried to be kind. But looking at that burnt piece of $800 meat, I realized something terrifying. They did not respect me. They did not respect my business. And looking at the sheer volume of food they had consumed in one night, I knew they were just getting started. I stormed out of the kitchen and into the living room, my hands shaking so hard I had to clench them into fists. The air in the living room smelled like stale grease and the expensive vintage Cabernet they had raided from my cellar. The scene before me was a masterclass in disrespect. Andre was sprawled out on my beige linen sofa, his massive frame taking up all 3 cushions. His shoes were still on, and he had propped his muddy sneakers up on the coffee table right on top of my design magazines. The television was blaring a morning cartoon at full volume, but he was snoring loud enough to rattle the windows. But it was my mother-in-law Patricia who made me stop in my tracks. She was sitting in my favorite armchair, wrapped in her silk robe. In her hand, she held my glass measuring cup, not a coffee mug. She was drinking instant coffee out of my calibrated Pyrex measuring cup, the one I use strictly for precise baking chemistry. The sight of her casual misuse of my professional equipment was the spark that lit the fuse. I did not say good morning. I screamed, "Who ate the Wagyu?" My voice cracked with the sheer force of my anger. The sound startled Patricia so much she spilled hot coffee down her front, but I did not care. On the sofa, Andre grunted and swatted at the air as if I were a buzzing fly. He slowly peeled one eye open, looking at me with pure annoyance. Yo, keep it down, Nicole. I am trying to recover here. He yawned, stretching his arms and knocking a throw pillow onto the floor. He did not even look guilty. He looked bored. I marched over and turned off the television. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. You ate $800 worth of client inventory, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. That beef was for the mayor. It was a 5 Japanese Wagyu. Do you have any idea what you have done? Andre sat up and picked something out of his teeth. He looked me right in the eye and shrugged. That was fancy beef, he scoffed. Could have fooled me. It was dry as hell, by the way. If you call yourself a chef, you need to source better meat. It was like chewing on a tire. Next time, buy something with a little more fat on it. My jaw literally dropped. He had taken the most marbled, tender piece of meat in the world and cooked it until it was leather, and now he was critiquing the quality. I felt a vein throb in my temple. You overcooked it, you idiot, I shouted. You ruined it. Oh, stop being so dramatic. Nicole Patricia chimed in, wiping coffee off her robe. She set the measuring cup down on the wooden side table without a coaster, leaving a wet ring. Andre is a growing boy. He is training for a competition. He needs his protein. You cannot expect him to starve in a house full of food just because you want to hoard it for strangers. Hoard it. I laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. That is my inventory, Patricia. That is how I pay the mortgage on this house you are sleeping in for free. Patricia rolled her eyes, waving her hand dismissively. It is just one piece of meat, Nicole. Don't be so cheap. Family comes first. We were hungry and there was food in the fridge. Stop acting like we robbed a bank. It is unbecoming of a hostess to count every calorie her guests consume. Guests. They thought they were guests. I looked at Andre, scratching his stomach, and Patricia judging me over the rim of my own measuring cup. They did not see a business. They saw a free buffet, and they did not see me as a benefactor. They saw me as a servant who was complaining too much. My phone began to vibrate violently against the granite countertop. The screen flashed with the name of my assistant. I felt a cold drop of sweat roll down my back. I answered, and her voice was chipper and completely unaware of the disaster unfolding in my kitchen. She reminded me that the mayor's chief of staff would be arriving for the pickup in exactly 3 hours. 3 hours to source, prep, and cook a meal that usually takes 2 days to marinate and perfect. I hung up the phone and immediately went into crisis mode. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I pulled up my contacts list and dialed my primary butcher. My hands were shaking so bad I mistyped the number twice. When he finally answered, I did not even say hello. I told him I needed 3 pounds of A5 Wagyu and I needed it delivered within the hour. He laughed. He thought I was joking. When I told him I was serious, he told me the delivery trucks had already left for the morning route. I begged. I pleaded. I was a professional business owner reduced to begging a supplier because my brother-in-law wanted a midnight snack. Finally, the butcher agreed to send a special courier, but it would cost me. The rush fee alone was $200 on top of the premium market price, which had gone up since yesterday. I did not hesitate. I gave him my credit card number and told him to hurry. Next was the seafood supplier. This was even harder. Fresh crayfish does not just appear out of thin air in Chicago. I had to call 3 different vendors before I found one who had stock reserved for a high-end restaurant downtown. I had to offer to pay double the retail price to convince him to divert the shipment to my house. He agreed, but only if I paid up front. I pulled out my personal credit card because the business account was tied up in end-of-month transfers. I typed the numbers into the payment portal on my phone. A second later, a notification popped up on the screen. Authorization successful for $450. Then another notification for the beef. $750. My phone kept pinging with transaction alerts. Ding, ding, ding. I stared at the screen. $1,200. That was the total cost of the replacement ingredients plus the rush delivery fees. That was $1,200 that should have gone into my savings or back into the business. Instead, it was gone, burned up just like the meat in the sink. I looked up from my phone. Andre had fallen back asleep on the couch, his mouth wide open. Patricia was calmly scrolling through Facebook on her tablet, oblivious to the fact that I had just spent a mortgage payment to fix their mess. My chest felt tight. I was not just angry anymore. I was terrified, because I realized that to them, $1,200 meant nothing because it was not their money. But to me, it was weeks of hard work instantly erased. And the worst part was that the day had barely begun. Jason finally wandered into the kitchen around 8, wearing his crisp blue dress shirt and smelling of expensive cologne. He looked rested and ready for his corporate job. Meanwhile, I had been awake for 4 hours putting out fires and hemorrhaging money. The contrast between his calm morning routine and my internal chaos made my blood boil. He reached for the coffee pot, completely ignoring the lingering smell of burnt grease and the dark circles under my eyes. I did not offer him a mug. Instead, I slapped the printed transaction receipt onto the granite island right next to his hand. The paper hit the stone with a sharp slap that made him flinch. "Look at this," I said, my voice trembling with exhaustion. "Read the total, Jason. $1,200. That is what your brother's midnight snack just cost us. That is the price of the emergency replacement beef and the rush delivery fees because Andre decided to treat my commercial inventory like a free sample station at Costco." Jason picked up the paper and barely glanced at the numbers. He let out a long, suffering sigh, the kind a parent gives a toddler throwing a tantrum. He rubbed his temples as if my legitimate anger was a headache he did not want to deal with. "Honey, please," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "It is too early for this level of intensity. Can we not start the day with a fight?" He put the receipt down and tried to touch my arm, but I pulled away. He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that used to make my knees weak, but now just made my stomach turn. "You have to understand, Nicole. Mom is going through a lot right now. Losing the townhouse destroyed her. She is fragile. Her mental state is hanging by a thread." I stared at him in disbelief. Fragile? The woman who drank my coffee out of a measuring cup and called me cheap was fragile. And Andre Jason continued, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "The poor guy is under so much pressure. He is trying to find a job in this tough market. He is stressed out. Eating is his only coping mechanism right now. He did not mean to ruin your client's dinner. He just saw food and ate it. He is a simple guy." Then he said the words that made me want to scream. "Just write it off as a loss, babe. Think of it as charity. You are doing so well with the business. You are successful. They have nothing. Consider it a donation to family stability. Surely you can absorb a little hit for the sake of peace in the house." I looked at my husband. He was asking me to subsidize their disrespect. He was asking me to pay for the privilege of being robbed. Absorb a hit. This was not a hit. This was a violation. But looking at his dismissive face, I realized something colder than the freezer behind me. Jason was not on my team. He was not my partner. He was their shield. He was standing in the house I paid for, wearing clothes I bought him, telling me that my hard-earned money was less important than his brother's gluttony. I realized in that moment that I was completely alone. The invaders were not just at the gate. One was sleeping in my bed. That evening, I called a mandatory family meeting. The air in the dining room was heavy and suffocating. I had prepared a simple dinner of roasted chicken and root vegetables because I refused to open the commercial freezer for them ever again. Jason sat at the end of the table looking at his plate and moving his peas around with a fork to avoid making eye contact with me. Patricia was sighing loudly every few seconds, signaling her displeasure that the chicken was not the prime rib she had requested. Andre was texting under the table, the blue light illuminating his bored face. I stood at the head of the table, refusing to sit. I needed them to understand that the dynamic had changed. I was not the daughter-in-law anymore. I was the landlord and the business owner. I cleared my throat, and the sound echoed in the tense silence. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the anger simmering in my chest. "What happened this morning was unacceptable. You destroyed client property and cost this household over $1,000. This is not just a home. It is a place of business. If you cannot respect that, then you cannot stay here." Patricia scoffed, dropping her fork onto her plate with a loud clatter. "Oh, here we go again." The lecture. We said we were sorry, Nicole. What do you want, blood? I want boundaries, I snapped. I walked over to the refrigerator. In my hand, I held a laminated sign I had printed out that afternoon. It was bold red text on a white background. It read, Commercial Workspace. Authorized personnel only. Do not touch inventory under any circumstances. I used heavy-duty packing tape to secure it right at eye level on the stainless steel door. I smoothed it down, ensuring it could not be missed. This is not a decoration, I told them, pointing at the sign. This is a rule. Anything behind this door is off limits. If you are hungry, there is a pantry full of regular snacks. But this fridge is for my paying customers only. I turned my back to them to load the dishwasher, feeling a slight sense of relief. I thought I had made my point. I thought the visual reminder would be enough to shame them into compliance. But I underestimated the depth of their entitlement. The sound of ripping tape cut through the room like a gunshot. I spun around. Brittany was standing by the fridge. She had peeled my sign off the door, balling the laminated paper up in her fist. She looked me dead in the eye with a smirk that was pure malice. She tossed the crumpled sign into the trash can as if it were a used tissue. Oops, she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. It fell. Then she turned to Patricia and whispered, but she made sure it was loud enough for me to hear. Look at her mom, acting like she is the Queen of England. She forgets whose name is on the mailbox. It is my brother's house. She just cooks in it. I looked at Jason, waiting for him to correct her. I waited for him to say, actually, Nicole bought this house 3 years before we met. I waited for him to defend my ownership and my dignity. But he just took a sip of water and looked out the window, pretending he was deaf. That silence hurt more than the stolen beef. It was the moment I realized the war had officially begun. The end of the month brought the financial reckoning. I sat in my home office with the credit card statement glowing on my computer screen. I rubbed my eyes, hoping the number would change if I blinked hard enough. It did not. The total for household groceries for the last 30 days was $4,112. I stared at the screen. That number was astronomical. That was more than some families spend in 6 months. My business food costs were separate, so this was purely what we were consuming personally. I clicked on the transaction details to see where the money had gone, and my blood pressure spiked immediately. It was not just the volume of food, it was the audacity of their specific demands. I walked to the pantry to verify the madness in person. There it was, an entire shelf dominated by cases of Fiji water. Andre refused to drink the filtered water from the fridge door because he claimed the pH balance of tap water messed with his muscle recovery. He drank 6 bottles a day at $3 a bottle. That alone was hundreds of dollars a month for water that came in a plastic bottle. Next to the water were jars of artisanal organic almond butter that cost $18 each. Brittany went through 2 jars a week. She did not just eat it on toast. I had caught her using it as a base for her homemade face masks because she read on a blog that it was good for pores. She was smearing $18 food on her face while I was working double shifts. I opened the fridge and the entitlement continued. The regular farm-raised salmon I used to buy for simple weeknight dinners was gone. In its place were individually wrapped fillets of wild-caught Alaskan king salmon at $40 a pound. Patricia had insisted that farm-raised fish had toxins that upset her delicate digestion. She claimed she could taste the difference, but I knew for a fact she drowned it in so much ranch dressing she could be eating cardboard and not know it. They were living like celebrities on my dime. They requested these items with a casual arrogance that was breathtaking. When I bought regular brand oat milk last week, Brittany actually gagged and asked if I was trying to poison her. She sent me back to the store for the premium barista blend because the texture was better for her latte art. I did the math quickly in my head. They were consuming over $100 of food a day, just in snacks and drinks. They contributed $0 to the budget. Not a cent. They did not even buy their own toilet paper. I looked at the statement again. This was not sustainable. This was financial bleeding. And looking at the row of expensive almond butter jars, I realized they were not just hungry. They were testing me. They were seeing exactly how much they could take before I snapped. I walked into the living room holding the printed bank statement like a weapon. The paper was still warm from the printer. Andre was doing push-ups on my Persian rug while Brittany painted her nails on the coffee table. The smell of acetone mixed with the lingering scent of their expensive snacks. I did not wait for them to acknowledge me. I dropped the stack of papers right next to Brittany's wet nails. "This stops today," I said, my voice ice cold. "I have highlighted every item that was purchased specifically for you two. The Fiji water, the organic almond butter, the wild-caught salmon. The total comes to over $4,000. I expect you to transfer $2,000 to my account by the end of the week to cover your share." Andre stopped mid-push-up. He stood up slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead with the throw blanket I bought in Italy. He looked at the papers and then looked at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Pay you?" he asked. "You want us to pay you for food?" "Nicole, we are guests. Since when do guests pay for dinner?" "Since the guests started eating like royalty while contributing nothing," I snapped. "This is not a hotel, Andre, and even hotels charge for room service. You are eating better than I do, and I am the one paying for it." Andre stepped closer to me, using his height to try and intimidate me. He puffed out his chest. "Look, Nicole, I am in a bulking phase right now. Do you know what that requires? It requires 4,000 calories of clean protein a day. My body is my temple and my career. I cannot eat garbage. I need premium fuel to build this physique. You are my sister-in-law. You should be supporting my dreams, not handing me a bill like a waitress. You have a successful business. You have money. Why are you trying to sabotage my gains over a few grocery bills?" I stared at him. He truly believed his gym routine was a valid excuse to bankrupt me. He saw my hard-earned money as a scholarship for his muscles. Before I could respond, Brittany chimed in. Her eyes welled up with tears instantly. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She looked at me with trembling lips. "How can you be so cruel, Nicole?" she sobbed. "You know we are struggling. You know we lost our townhouse. We have $0 in our savings account. We are traumatized from the foreclosure, and now you are kicking us while we are down. Do you want us to starve? Do you want us to go live under a bridge?" She grabbed a tissue and dabbed at her dry eyes. "We are family. Family is supposed to help each other. But you are acting like a debt collector. If you want the money so bad, maybe I should just go sell my wedding ring." "Is that what you want, Nicole? You want me to sell the only memory I have left of my happiness just so you can buy more expensive ingredients?" I looked from Andre's arrogant face to Brittany's fake tears. They were not embarrassed. They were offended. They truly believed that my role on this earth was to fund their lifestyle and that asking for reimbursement was an act of violence. I realized then that logic would never work with these people. They did not speak the language of responsibility. They only spoke the language of manipulation. And I was done listening. 2 days later, I was sitting at the kitchen island, buried under a mountain of tax forms and vendor invoices. For the first time all week, the house was quiet. Jason was at golf, and Patricia was napping. I was actually enjoying the silence and the productivity. I had my headphones on and was focused on balancing the ledger for the upcoming quarter. Then the peace was shattered. The kitchen door flew open with such force it banged against the cabinets. Brittany marched in. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, but she was dressed like she was going to the Met Gala. She wore a tight sequined cocktail dress and enough perfume to trigger a migraine from 10 feet away. She was holding her phone up, filming herself in selfie mode. "Hey guys, we are just heading into the prep kitchen to check on the staff," she chirped at her phone screen before ending the recording and shoving the phone into her purse. She looked at me and frowned. "Why are you sitting down, Nicole? The girls will be here in 20 minutes. You are not even dressed." I took off my headphones and stared at her. "What girls? What are you talking about?" Brittany rolled her eyes as if I were the slow one. "My influencer circle. The squad. I told you this morning. I invited 10 of them over for a luxury Galentine's brunch. I need content for my feed, Nicole. My engagement is down, and I need to show off the estate." She started snapping her fingers at me. "Chop chop. I need 5 trays of sushi, spicy tuna and dragon rolls. Make sure the avocado is fresh this time. And I need those little French cookies, macarons, 20 of them. Make them lavender to match my dress. And I want them on the silver platter, not the ceramic one." I sat there blinking. Macarons take hours to make. The batter has to rest. The shells have to dry. Sushi rice has to be washed and seasoned and cooled. She was asking for a day of work to be done in 20 minutes. Brittany, I said, closing my laptop slowly. I am not making sushi. I am not making macarons. You never asked me about this. I am working. This is my office right now. Brittany let out a screech of frustration. I do not need to ask you. You are the chef. That is what you do. You cook. I already posted the menu on my Instagram story. I promised a 5-star seafood experience. If there is no food, I will look like a liar. She walked over and tried to pull my laptop away. Stop doing paperwork and start chopping. I told them my brother hired a private chef for the family estate. Do not embarrass me, Nicole. These girls have thousands of followers. If you ruin this for me, I will tell everyone that you are abusive and lazy. Now get up and make the sushi. I looked at her manicured hands grabbing at my business ledger. She truly believed that because I cooked for a living, I was her personal servant. She had sold a lie to her friends, and she expected me to scramble to make it true. She saw me not as a sister-in-law, but as a prop in her social media fantasy. And the worst part was, she did not even offer to pay for the ingredients she was demanding. She just demanded them like a queen addressing a peasant. I stood up and smoothed down my apron, looking Brittany dead in the eye. I delivered the reality check she desperately needed. I am not your staff, Brittany. I am running a business. If you want food for your friends, you can open that Uber Eats app and order 5 pizzas with your own money. Now get out of my kitchen. I have taxes to file. Brittany opened her mouth to scream, but the doorbell rang. Her face went pale. The squad had arrived. She shot me a look of pure venom before smoothing her dress and plastering on a fake smile. She ran to the door, chirping greetings in a high-pitched voice that grated on my nerves. A minute later, the kitchen was invaded. 10 women clicked in on red-soled heels holding designer handbags. They looked around my kitchen expecting a buffet. What they found was a clean counter and me sitting with my laptop and a cold cup of coffee. The silence was deafening. One of them, a brunette with overlined lips, whispered loudly to her friend. I thought she said there was a seafood tower. Brittany saw her social standing crumbling before her eyes. Instead of admitting she lied, she decided to throw me under the bus. She burst into tears. Actual tears rolled down her cheeks, ruining her contour. She pointed a shaking finger at me. I am so sorry, guys, she sobbed. I promised you a feast, but she refused to cook it. She sabotaged me on purpose. She hates that I am younger and prettier than her. She is jealous of my influencer career, so she decided to humiliate me by starving my guests. The room gasped. 10 pairs of eyes turned to me, filled with judgment. They looked at me like I was the wicked stepmother in a Disney movie. One of them actually said, "That is so toxic. You should not treat family like that just because you are insecure about your age." I sat there stunned. I was 34, not 80. And I was not jealous of a 26-year-old who had to beg for allowance. But I did not defend myself. I did not scream. I realized that arguing with fools only proves there are two. I simply turned back to my laptop and typed on my keyboard, ignoring the whispers and the glares. Brittany ordered pizza with her mother's credit card, and they ate it in the living room, leaving grease stains on my upholstery while talking trash about me loud enough for me to hear every word. The last of Brittany's friends finally clicked their red-soled heels out the front door, leaving behind a mountain of empty pizza boxes and the smell of cheap perfume. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 hours. I just wanted to go upstairs, take a hot shower, and wash the toxicity of the day off my skin. I gathered my laptop and headed toward the staircase. But I never made it to the first step. Andre stepped out of the shadows of the living room, blocking my path. He is a massive man, 6 feet 4 inches of pure muscle built from hours in the gym and apparently fueled by my expensive groceries. In that narrow hallway, he looked like a wall. He did not move to let me pass. He stood there, arms crossed over his chest, his biceps straining against his tight t-shirt, looking down at me with eyes that were cold and hard. "We need to talk, Nicole," he said. His voice was deep and vibrated in the small space. It was not a request. I hugged my laptop to my chest like a shield. I have nothing to say to you, Andre. I am tired. Please move. He did not budge. You humiliated my wife today. You made her cry in front of her friends. You sat there with your laptop acting like you were too good to help family. You think you are so superior, don't you? You with your business and your house and your rules. I looked up at him, refusing to back down. I am not superior, Andre. I am just employed. There is a difference. That is when the conversation took a turn I never expected. He took a step closer, forcing me to press my back against the wall. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. It is not about the job, Nicole. We both know what this is really about. You don't hate us because we are broke. You hate us because of me. You hate that Brittany married a black man. You hate seeing a black man comfortable in your precious suburban house. I stared at him, my mouth falling open. The accusation was so absurd, so calculated that I froze. I had married into a diverse family. My staff was diverse. My clients were diverse. This had nothing to do with race, and everything to do with respect. That is disgusting, Andre, I whispered. How dare you use that as an excuse for your laziness? This is about you stealing my inventory. It has nothing to do with the color of your skin. He smiled, a slow, cruel smile. It doesn't matter what is true, Nicole. It matters what people believe. And right now I am holding a very powerful card. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. I have 5,000 followers on Instagram. Not a lot, but enough to start a fire. All I have to do is post one video. Just one video of me crying, saying that a local business owner refuses to feed her black brother-in-law. Saying she locks food away from him. Saying she calls him lazy. Do you know what happens to businesses like yours when the internet decides they are racist? My blood ran cold. He was threatening to weaponize social justice to destroy my livelihood. He knew exactly how damaging that label could be. I will cancel you, Andre hissed. I will burn Nicole's table to the ground. You will lose your clients. You will lose your reputation. And you will be begging us to forgive you. So next time my wife asks for sushi, you make the damn sushi. Do you understand me? He pushed past me, his shoulder checking mine hard enough to make me stumble. He walked into the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of wine, whistling, as if he hadn't just threatened to ruin my life. I stood in the hallway shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that I was living with a monster. The war with Andre was loud and aggressive, but the war with Patricia was silent and insidious. 2 days after the sushi incident, I came home early to find the house smelling overwhelmingly of cheap floral perfume and stale biscuits. My mother-in-law was sitting in the sunroom flipping through a magazine, looking incredibly pleased with herself. But as I walked past the dining room, my stomach dropped. My antique china cabinet was unlocked. The glass door was slightly ajar. I froze. On the top shelf there had been a hand-painted teapot from the 1920s. It was a Royal Albert piece with gold leaf detailing that I had bought at an auction with my very first catering check. It was worth $300, but to me it was a trophy of my independence. The shelf was empty. I walked into the sunroom and asked Patricia where my teapot was. I kept my voice calm. She did not even look up from her magazine. She waved a hand dismissively and told me that a terrible draft had blown through the house earlier. She said the wind must have knocked the cabinet door open and the pot just fell out. Then she paused and corrected herself, saying actually it might have been the cat. She claimed the cat jumped up and knocked it over. She said she had done me a huge favor by sweeping up the mess so I would not cut my feet. She looked me right in the eye and lied with the ease of a sociopath. She said it was just an old pot anyway, and I should not leave breakable things around if I did not want them broken. I nodded slowly and walked away. I did not scream. I did not cry. I walked straight to my home office and opened the app for the security cameras I had installed in the main living areas months ago. Patricia knew they were there, but she was so arrogant she often forgot they were recording. I rewound the footage to 2 in the afternoon. The truth was high definition and crystal clear. There was no wind. There was no cat. Patricia had invited 3 of her neighbors over for a high tea to show off the estate she claimed was hers. I watched as she paraded around the living room pouring tea from my Royal Albert pot, playing the role of the wealthy matriarch. Then I saw the moment happen. She was gesturing dramatically, trying to impress a neighbor with a story about her imaginary wealth. She swung her arm too wide and the teapot slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 pieces. On the screen, I watched her reaction. She did not look sad. She looked annoyed. She rolled her eyes. Then she hurriedly swept the shards into a dustpan and dumped them deep in the kitchen trash, covering them with wet paper towels to hide the evidence. She went back to her guests and laughed. I sat there in the dark glow of my monitor, watching my mother-in-law sweep away a piece of my history like it was garbage. I did not go back downstairs to confront her. Confronting a liar only gives them a chance to invent a better lie. Instead, I downloaded the video clip and saved it to a folder on my desktop named Evidence. I added $300 to the running total in my head. She thought she had gotten away with it. She had no idea she was just digging her own grave, one lie at a time. That video file was the closing argument in the trial I had been holding in my head. For weeks I had tried to be the bigger person. I had tried to lead with empathy. I had treated them like family members who were going through a rough patch. But staring at the footage of Patricia sweeping my history into the trash, I realized they were not family. They were active threats to my livelihood. You do not negotiate with people who steal from you and lie to your face. You secure your perimeter. I closed my laptop and felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety was gone, replaced by cold, hard determination. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a commercial restaurant equipment supplier I had used for my catering kitchen renovation. He answered on the second ring, knowing that if I was calling this late, it was serious. I need to place an order, I said, skipping the pleasantries. And I need it expedited. I need it installed tomorrow morning. I described exactly what I needed. I did not want a residential refrigerator with a water dispenser and a cute touchscreen. I did not want something that looked nice in a magazine. I wanted a fortress. I ordered a top-of-the-line industrial reach-in refrigerator. I specified heavy-duty stainless steel exterior that could withstand a hammer. I asked for reinforced hinges that could not be unscrewed from the outside. I requested temperature alarms that would send an alert to my phone if the door was left ajar for more than 30 seconds. And then I dropped the most important requirement. I need the security package. I want the integrated digital keypad lock with an auto-locking mechanism. No physical keys, biometric or code access only. The supplier hesitated on the other end of the line. He warned me that it was overkill for a home kitchen. He told me it would look like a bank vault sitting next to my warm granite countertops. He told me the price tag was $6,000 plus an emergency installation fee. He asked if I was opening a pharmacy or a high-security lab. I did not flinch. I told him to put it on the business card. $6,000 was a painful amount of money to spend on an appliance I did not technically need for cooking. But as I did the mental math, it was the only logical choice. They were eating $4,000 of inventory a month. In 2 months, this fridge would pay for itself. It was not just an appliance. It was an investment in my sanity. It was an insurance policy against their greed. I scheduled the installation for 8 in the morning, right after Jason left for work. I wanted the element of surprise. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen. It looked like a warm, inviting home now, but by tomorrow it would be a secure facility. The era of the open buffet was officially over. I went upstairs and slept better than I had in weeks, knowing that the cavalry was coming in the form of reinforced steel. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the silence of the house was shattered by the sound of power drills and heavy boots on hardwood floors. I had timed it perfectly. Jason had just pulled out of the driveway for work, and the Leaches were still sound asleep in the guest wing. I opened the front door to a team of 4 contractors who looked like they were preparing to build a bunker rather than install a kitchen appliance. They brought in the beast on a heavy-duty dolly. It was a true manufacturing commercial reach-in refrigerator standing 7 feet tall and encased in heavy-gauge stainless steel. It did not match my white shaker cabinets or the farmhouse aesthetic of the kitchen, and I did not care. It looked like a monolith. It looked like a bank vault. The lead technician secured it directly to the wall studs with bolts thick enough to hold an engine block, ensuring it could not be tipped, moved, or tampered with. Then came the most important feature: the lock. It was a digital keypad with a biometric fingerprint scanner glowing with a menacing red light. It was the kind of security system you see in pharmaceutical labs, not suburban homes. While two men installed the fridge, the other two were mounting the new surveillance system. I was done with grainy footage that left room for interpretation. I had them install high-definition 360-degree dome cameras in the corners of the ceiling. They covered every single inch of the kitchen, the pantry, and the dining room. There were no blind spots left. There was no corner where Patricia could break a teapot and blame the wind. The feed went directly to a cloud server that only I could access. Once the technicians left and the dust settled, I began the Great Migration. I opened the old residential fridge, which was currently stuffed with the premium groceries they had bullied me into buying. I started pulling out everything of value. The jar of truffle oil went into the vault, the saffron threads, the imported French cheeses, the $40 wild-caught salmon fillets. I moved every single item that had been purchased with my business card or my personal funds. I organized them on the steel shelves of the new fridge like jewels in a display case. I took the remaining Wagyu beef and the fresh produce for the upcoming wedding contract and locked them away. Then I programmed the security interface. I set a complex 12-digit code that no one could guess and scanned my thumbprint. I closed the heavy steel door and the automatic bolt slid home with a loud metallic thud. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I turned back to the old family fridge. It looked cavernous and depressing. It was now completely empty, save for the absolute bare essentials. I went to the pantry and retrieved a loaf of generic white bread that cost 99 cents and a plastic tub of vegetable oil spread that legally could not be called butter. I placed them on the center shelf. A single loaf of generic bread and a tub of fake butter sitting alone in the cold white light. That was it. That was their menu. If they wanted the 5-star experience, they could pay for it. If not, they could eat toast. I stood back and admired my work. My kitchen was no longer a free-for-all. It was a fortress, and I was the only one with the key. The sun was streaming through the kitchen windows when Andre finally rolled out of bed around 10 in the morning. I was already working at the island prepping invoices, but I kept my head down, waiting for the inevitable explosion. He scratched his stomach and yawned loudly, heading straight for the residential fridge. He was on a mission for his usual breakfast, which consisted of 6 scrambled eggs with cheddar cheese and a side of thick-cut bacon. He yanked the door of the old fridge open and froze. The shelves that usually groaned under the weight of premium ingredients were barren. The stark white plastic interior gleamed under the light, exposing the emptiness. There was no bacon, there were no organic eggs, there was no imported cheese. In the center of the middle shelf sat a single loaf of generic white bread and a plastic tub of vegetable oil spread. It looked pathetic. It looked like the fridge of a college student who had $5 to their name. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if he was hallucinating. He moved the bread loaf aside, hoping the steak was hiding behind it. Nothing. He slammed the door shut and spun around to face me. "Where is the food, Nicole?" He demanded, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. "I need my protein. This fridge is empty. Did you forget to go shopping?" I did not look up from my laptop. I simply pointed a pen toward the massive stainless steel monolith bolted to the far wall. Andre scoffed. "Oh, right. The new toy. Whatever. Just tell me where the eggs are." He marched over to the commercial unit, gripping the heavy chrome handle with entitlement. He pulled. Nothing happened. The door did not budge a millimeter. He frowned and pulled harder, bracing his foot against the base of the unit. It was solid as a rock bolted into the studs of the house. Then he noticed the digital keypad glowing blue at eye level. He started mashing buttons randomly, thinking it was a simple code like 1234. The keypad let out a sharp, angry beep. A red light flashed next to the fingerprint scanner. The small digital screen displayed the words "Access denied." He tried again, punching in his own birthday. "Access denied." He tried Jason's birthday. "Access denied." "Open the damn door, Nicole!" he shouted, pounding his fist against the stainless steel. The sound rang out like a gong in the quiet kitchen. "I need to eat. This is ridiculous. I am not playing your little games. Open it now. I finally looked up and gave him a calm smile. That is a commercial inventory unit, Andre. It is biometric. Unless you have my thumbprint, that door stays closed. If you are hungry, there is bread in the pantry fridge. Andre let out a roar of frustration and kicked the base of the fridge with his bare foot. He immediately hopped around in pain, cursing loudly. He grabbed the handle with both hands and shook it, trying to brute force the lock, but the steel mechanism held fast. For the first time in his life, Andre was hearing the word no, and it was coming from a machine he could not bully. The realization that he was locked out of his food source washed over his face, turning his arrogance into pure panic. I stood in the doorway, buttoning the cuffs of my pristine white chef coat. I had ironed it the night before, until the fabric was stiff and sharp. I tied my apron tight around my waist and smoothed the fabric. I was not Nicole, the doormat sister-in-law, anymore. I was Nicole, the executive chef and owner. I walked into the kitchen with the confidence of a CEO entering a boardroom. Andre was red in the face, breathing heavy from his tantrum against the steel door. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "Fix this, Nicole. Fix it right now. The machine is broken. It will not let me in." I walked past him and picked up my clipboard from the counter. I did not look at him. I checked the temperature gauge on the digital display. 38 degrees. Perfect. "The machine is not broken, Andre," I said, my voice calm and professional. "It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is protecting valuable assets from unauthorized personnel." Patricia shuffled into the room, drawn by the noise. She saw the empty white fridge and the locked steel vault. Her eyes went wide. "Nicole, what is going on? Where is the yogurt? Where is the heavy cream for my coffee? Why is everything locked up?" I turned to face them both. I stood tall, my white coat gleaming in the morning sun. I pointed to the threshold of the kitchen where the tile met the hardwood of the dining room. "Listen closely, because I will say this only once. As of 8 o'clock this morning, this kitchen is no longer a communal family space. It is a licensed commercial zone. It is a place of business. Just like you cannot walk into the kitchen of a restaurant and start grabbing steaks, you cannot touch anything in this room without my permission." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest. "You are banning us from the kitchen. In our own home." "In my home, Patricia," I corrected her sharply. "And yes, I am banning you from the inventory. Do you see a badge on your chest? Do you have a food handler's permit? No. Therefore, you are a liability. If you touch my equipment or my ingredients, you are violating health codes and business insurance policies." Andre laughed a harsh, barking sound. "You are crazy. You actually think you can starve us out. You think we will just sit here and die of hunger while you hoard all the food in that metal box." I smiled. It was a cold smile. "I am not starving you, Andre. I am simply stopping you from stealing from me. You are a grown man. You have a car. You have legs. There is a supermarket exactly 2 miles down the road. They have plenty of eggs and plenty of steak. The only difference is that when you go there, you have to pay for it at the register instead of charging it to my soul." I picked up my knife and began chopping vegetables for my client. The sound of the blade hitting the cutting board was rhythmic and final. Chop, chop, chop. "If you are hungry, go to the store," I said without looking up. "But do not expect me to cook whatever you buy. This restaurant is closed to freeloaders, permanently." The silence that followed was heavy with shock. They stood there staring at my back, realizing that the era of the free lunch had just ended with the click of a biometric lock. Later that afternoon, Patricia decided to escalate the war from verbal abuse to physical theater. I was in the living room updating my inventory logs when I heard a crash followed by Brittany screaming my name. I walked into the kitchen to find a scene straight out of a soap opera. Patricia was lying on the floor clutching her chest and moaning. She fluttered her eyelids and whispered that she was fading away. Brittany was kneeling beside her, holding her hand and looking at me with pure hatred. "She is fainting, Nicole!" Brittany shrieked. "Her blood sugar is dropping. She hasn't eaten anything but toast all day because of you. Open the fridge right now. She needs juice. She needs fruit. Open it, or I swear to God I will report you for elder abuse." Before I could even respond, the front door flew open. Jason came sprinting into the house, his tie flapping over his shoulder. Brittany must have called him in a panic. He ran into the kitchen and saw his mother sprawled on the tiles. He turned to me, his face red with fury. "Are you happy now, Nicole?" he yelled. "You are killing her. My mother is diabetic, and you have locked away the food. Open that damn fridge right now." He lunged for the keypad, trying to punch in numbers, but the red light just flashed, mocking him. He kicked the steel door. "Open it, Nicole. Do you want her to die on our floor?" I stood there calmly watching the performance. I knew for a fact Patricia was not diabetic. I also knew that if someone is truly crashing from low blood sugar, giving them a slice of prosciutto or a wedge of expensive brie is not the cure. They need rapid-acting glucose. I walked over to the coffee station and grabbed a handful of white sugar packets. I tossed them onto the floor next to Patricia's head. "If her blood sugar is low, that is pure glucose," I said, my voice steady. "Tear them open and pour them under her tongue. It works faster than fruit juice." Jason looked at the sugar packets and then at me as if I were insane. "I am not feeding my mother sugar packets like a horse. Open the fridge and get her some real food." I pulled out my phone. "This is a medical emergency, Jason. If she is unresponsive and the sugar is not working, we need professionals. I am calling 911. I dialed the numbers and put it on speakerphone so everyone could hear the dial tone. Patricia's eyes were still closed, but I saw her tense up. Emergency services operator asked on the line, "What is your emergency?" I spoke clearly. "Yes, I have a 62-year-old female collapsing on the floor. Possible diabetic coma. We need an ambulance immediately." The word ambulance was the magic spell. In America, an ambulance ride can cost $2,000 out of pocket, especially since Patricia had no insurance. Suddenly, the dying woman made a miraculous recovery. Patricia's eyes snapped open. She sat up with the speed of an athlete. "No," she shouted, scrambling to her feet. "No ambulance. Hang up the phone, Nicole. I am fine." It passed. I just felt a little dizzy. I looked at the operator. "Cancel the call. She is conscious." I hung up and looked at Jason. His mouth was hanging open. He looked from his mother, who was now standing perfectly upright, dusting off her robe, to the sugar packets on the floor. "She seems fine, Jason," I said. "It is amazing what the threat of a bill can do for one's health. Next time she feels faint, give her the sugar. The fridge stays locked." I walked out of the room, leaving them standing in the silence of their failed extortion attempt. Jason did not apologize. He just looked down at his shoes, realizing that he had rushed home to save a woman who was only playing dead to get a snack. The next 3 days were a masterclass in misery. The aroma of roasted garlic and fresh herbs that usually filled my home was replaced by the chemical tang of instant noodles and microwave popcorn. The kitchen table, which once hosted elaborate family dinners, now looked like a college dorm room after finals week. There were styrofoam cups everywhere and empty cans of sodium-packed soup that cost 80 cents at the discount store. Andre was deteriorating the fastest. Without a steady stream of premium protein, he was convinced his body was consuming itself. He spent hours standing in front of the hallway mirror, aggressively measuring his biceps with a yellow sewing tape. He was paranoid and hangry. When he couldn't find the remote control, he didn't just look for it. He screamed and swept a row of framed photos off the mantel. The glass shattered, but he didn't even flinch. He just kicked the shards aside, muttering about his caloric deficit. Brittany, on the other hand, went from aggressive to sneaky. She realized that brute force against the steel fridge was useless, so she decided to target the key holder. She watched me like a hawk. She tracked my movements, waiting for me to make a mistake and leave the access card unattended. On Thursday evening, I went upstairs to take a shower after a 12-hour shift. I was exhausted, and I let my guard down just enough to relax under the hot water. The bathroom door was locked, but it was a standard privacy lock easily picked with a fingernail or a bobby pin. Midway through washing my hair, I heard it. The doorknob jiggled ever so slightly. Then came the soft scratch of metal on metal. Brittany was trying to pick the lock. She assumed that, like a normal person, I would have left my keys in my pants pocket on the bedroom floor. She wanted to sneak in, grab the keycard, raid the fridge, and put it back before I rinsed off the conditioner. I turned off the water and stood in the silence. The scratching stopped. I wrapped a towel around myself and unlocked the door, flinging it open. Brittany was standing there pretending to dig through the linen closet in the hallway. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, hey," she stammered, her eyes darting to the bedroom behind me. "I was just looking for fresh towels." I didn't say a word. I just adjusted the towel around my chest. As I did, the silver light caught the object resting against my collarbone. It was the master key card and the backup physical key attached to a heavy-duty waterproof military-grade lanyard. I wore it in the shower. I wore it while I slept. It was literally attached to my body 24 hours a day. Brittany's eyes dropped to the key and her shoulders slumped in defeat. She realized there was no window of opportunity. There was no moment of forgetfulness she could exploit. I was not just a gatekeeper. I was the gate. I walked past her into my bedroom and locked the deadbolt I had installed on my bedroom door the day before. The siege was holding, but I knew desperation makes people do stupid things, and they were getting very desperate. Friday morning arrived with a tension you could cut with a knife. I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, the wheels thumping a rhythm that sounded like freedom. I walked into the kitchen where the vultures were gathering. They knew something was happening. I had been vague about my schedule all week, but now the suitcase confirmed it. I stood by the island and made the announcement that I knew would sound like music to their ears. "I am going to New York for the Culinary Innovation Summit," I said, checking my watch. "My flight leaves in 2 hours. I will be gone for 7 days." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Patricia actually smiled at me for the first time in a month. It was a predatory smile. I could see the gears turning in her head. 7 days without the warden. 7 days of freedom. Andre looked at Brittany and gave a subtle nod. They were already planning the party. They were imagining the house to themselves, imagining the loud music and the mess they would make without me there to police them. But I was not just leaving, I was setting a trap. I knew that the biometric lock on the commercial fridge was secure, but I wanted to send a message that was impossible to ignore. I wanted to insult them one last time before I walked out the door. I wanted to make the forbidden fruit seem even more desirable by putting it behind one more barrier. I reached into my bag and pulled out a heavy, hardened steel chain. It was thick and cold and looked like something you would use to secure a motorcycle. I walked over to the stainless steel vault. I threaded the chain through the custom handle and around the support bracket on the wall. The metal rattled loudly in the silent kitchen. Then I pulled out a massive iron padlock. It was the size of a fist. Andre watched me, his jaw tightening. "You have got to be kidding me," he spat out. "A chain, Nicole? Really? You are treating us like animals. You think we are going to break in?" I snapped the lock shut. Click. I tugged on it to make sure it held. I turned to him and spoke with deadly seriousness. "Inside this fridge is $20,000 of inventory for the wedding of the year. There are truffles from Italy. There is caviar from the Caspian Sea. This is not lunch, Andre. This is my career. If this seal is broken, I am not calling a family meeting. I am calling the authorities." I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by greed. He looked at the chain, not as a stop sign, but as a challenge. I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. I did not say goodbye. I did not tell them I loved them. I just walked out into the fresh air, leaving them alone with the temptation. I knew they could not resist. It was not a matter of if they would try to break in. It was only a matter of when. The Uber driver honked outside, signaling that my escape vehicle had arrived. I stood in the foyer with my carry-on bag and my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. I was leaving the Fox in charge of the henhouse. I looked at Jason sitting in his favorite recliner. He was hunched over his phone, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. The sound of digital gunfire and explosions filled the room. He was playing a zombie survival game, completely checking out of his own reality. I knew exactly what would happen the moment I left. If things went wrong, he would say he never heard me. He would say I never told him how important the food was. He would gaslight me just like his mother did. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the voice memo app and hit the red record button. I needed insurance. "Jason," I said loud enough to cut through the noise of his game. Look at me. He didn't look up. He just grunted. Yeah, babe, have a safe flight. Bring me back a souvenir. I walked over and stood directly in front of him, blocking the light. I needed him to hear this. I needed his verbal confirmation on tape. Jason paused the game. This is serious. I need you to understand what is in that fridge. Inside that steel unit is $20,000 of inventory. 20,000. It is for the Vanderwall wedding next weekend. It includes white truffles imported from Alba and caviar that costs more than your car. Jason finally paused the game, but he looked annoyed. He rolled his eyes and let out a dramatic sigh. Okay, Nicole. I get it. Expensive food. Big lock. Got it. You have said it 1,000 times. I leaned in closer. If that food disappears, or if that fridge is tampered with, my business is over. I will lose my catering license. I will be sued for breach of contract. We will go bankrupt. Do you understand? You are the only one with the code besides me. You are responsible for making sure your family does not break into that unit. He waved his hand dismissively, picking his phone back up. You are so dramatic, Nicole. Nobody is going to break into your precious vault. Mom and Andre are not criminals. They are just hungry. Stop being paranoid and go to your conference. I will keep an eye on them. It will be fine. I looked at the recording timer ticking on my screen. I had it. I had him acknowledging the value. I had him accepting responsibility. And I had his dismissal of the threat. Okay, Jason, I said quietly. I am holding you to that. I stopped the recording and saved the file, naming it Final Warning. I uploaded it immediately to my cloud storage. I looked at my husband one last time. He had already unpaused his game, lost in a virtual world, while the real world was about to burn down around him. He had no idea that he had just signed a verbal contract that would cost him everything. I turned around and walked out the front door into the cool morning air. I had done my part. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for it to snap shut. The house settled into a heavy silence the moment the front door clicked shut behind me. The sound of the taxi fading down the driveway was the signal Andre had been waiting for. He emerged from the living room like a predator stepping out of the shadows. The kitchen was empty. The counters were clean. But the air still held the faint metallic scent of the chain I had wrapped around the refrigerator handles. Andre walked straight to the commercial unit. It stood against the wall like a monolith, humming with a low, powerful vibration. Unlike the solid steel door of the freezer, this reach-in unit had a triple-paned reinforced glass door designed to show off the inventory to chefs during a rush. Now it served a different purpose. It was a window into a world Andre felt he was being unjustly denied. He pressed his face close to the cold glass, his breath fogging up the surface slightly. Inside, the LED lighting illuminated the shelves like a museum display. His eyes widened as they adjusted to the brightness. There, right at eye level, were the replacement cuts of Kobe beef I had sourced for the wedding. They were thick crimson slabs heavily marbled with creamy white fat that promised to melt on the tongue like butter. They were vacuum sealed, but Andre could practically smell the richness through the glass. On the shelf below sat the rows of imported caviar. Small black tins of beluga and ossetra stacked in a neat pyramid. Each tin cost more than his car payment. Next to them were wheels of truffle pecorino and aged Gouda wrapped in wax paper. There were jars of foie gras and bottles of vintage balsamic vinegar. It was a culinary treasure chest, a hoarding of wealth and flavor that made his stomach cramp with violent hunger. Andre swallowed hard, his mouth filling with saliva. He had been living on sodium-rich instant noodles and dry toast for days. His body, used to consuming 4,000 calories of premium fuel, was screaming for sustenance. He looked at the beef again, imagining the sound it would make hitting a hot cast-iron skillet. He imagined the smell filling the house, replacing the depressing odor of microwave popcorn. He reached out and wrapped his hand around the cold steel handle. He gave it a tug. The chain rattled loudly, the heavy iron padlock clanking against the glass. The resistance was firm and unforgiving. The digital lock blinked its red eye at him. Access denied. A wave of irrational anger washed over him. He looked at the food that was sitting just inches away, separated only by glass, and Nicole's stubbornness. It felt personal. She wasn't just saving this for a client. She was taunting him. She was waving a steak in front of a starving lion and laughing. He traced the outline of the Kobe beef on the glass with his finger, leaving a greasy smear. The craving in his gut stopped being just hunger and turned into something darker. It became a need to take. It became a need to conquer the metal beast and claim what he believed he was owed. He stared at the padlock, and for the first time, he didn't see an obstacle. He saw a puzzle that needed to be solved with force. By the second day of my absence, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from desperation to conspiracy. The kitchen was no longer a place of hunger. It was a war room. The silence of the house was broken only by the low hum of the commercial compressor, a sound that taunted them every second. Patricia sat at the kitchen island staring at the stainless steel vault with eyes that were cold and calculating. She was not looking at a refrigerator anymore. She was looking at an enemy combatant that needed to be neutralized. She looked at Andre, who was pacing the floor like a caged tiger, his muscles twitching with agitation. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, even though I was hundreds of miles away in New York. She told him that I was gone and that nobody was watching. She said that who was to say what really happened while the lady of the house was away? She suggested that maybe a burglar broke in through the back door. Or maybe the expensive digital lock simply malfunctioned and popped open on its own. She leaned in closer, her voice dripping with poison. She told them that they were the victims here. She said it was cruel for me to lock up food in their own home. She framed the potential break-in not as a crime, but as an act of survival. She planted the seed in Andre's mind that breaking that lock was not theft. It was justice. Brittany sat across from her, filing her nails and nodding in agreement. She chimed in with her own twisted logic. She said that technically they were family. She argued that since her brother Jason owned the house, they had a legal right to everything inside it, including my business inventory. She convinced herself that the food inside was just groceries, not assets. She looked at Andre and told him to go ahead. She said that even if I found out, the worst that could happen was a bill. She laughed, saying that at most, they might owe me a few $100s for some steaks. She claimed I was exaggerating the value of the inventory just to be mean. She said there was no way a few jars of fish eggs and some cheese could be worth thousands of dollars. They sat there feeding off each other's entitlement, building a fortress of rationalization. They convinced themselves that I was the villain for starving them and they were the heroes for taking what they needed. They erased the concept of consequences from their minds. They looked at the heavy chain and the padlock not as a warning sign, but as a personal insult that needed to be removed. Patricia gave Andre a final nod. It was the permission he had been waiting for. The decision was made. They were not going to wait for me to come back. They were going to take what they wanted, and they were going to do it now. Andre marched to the garage with a purpose that terrified me, even though I was watching it on a screen hundreds of miles away. He returned holding a pair of heavy-duty red bolt cutters that belonged to Jason. They were tools meant for construction sites, not for kitchen appliances. He looked like a bank robber preparing to crack a safe. Patricia and Brittany stood back, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhilarating anticipation. They knew there was no turning back now. He approached the fridge and positioned the jaws of the cutters around the hardened steel shackle of the padlock. He gritted his teeth and squeezed the rubber handles with all his strength. His biceps bulged under the strain. There was a moment of resistance where the metal groaned and then a violent snap echoed through the house like a gunshot. The heavy iron lock hit the floor with a deafening clang, followed by the rattle of the chain as he ripped it away. But the beast was not defeated yet. The digital biometric lock was still glowing red, holding the door shut with its electronic deadbolt. Andre did not have the patience for finesse. He dropped the bolt cutters and pulled a hammer and a flathead screwdriver from his back pocket. He jammed the tip of the screwdriver into the seam between the keypad and the stainless steel door frame. Then he started swinging. Clang, clang, crack. The sound of metal being tortured was excruciating. It was a high-pitched screeching of steel tearing against steel. He hammered the screwdriver deeper, prying the electronic panel away from the unit. Sparks flew as he severed the wires. The plastic casing of the keypad shattered, sending shards flying across the kitchen floor. He was not just opening a fridge. He was murdering a piece of sophisticated machinery. Upstairs in the master bedroom, Jason froze. the sound of the destruction vibrated through the floorboards. It was impossible to ignore. He knew exactly what that sound was. He knew his brother was destroying the $20,000 inventory he had promised to protect. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling slightly. For a moment he looked at the door. He thought about going downstairs. He thought about being a man and stopping the madness. But then the fear of confrontation took over. He was terrified of his mother's guilt trips and his brother's rage. So he did the most cowardly thing imaginable. He reached for his noise-canceling gaming headphones. He placed them over his ears, turning the volume up until the sounds of explosions and gunfire drowned out the sound of his wife's livelihood being dismantled downstairs. He closed his eyes and pretended he was alone. Down in the kitchen, Andre gave one final savage yank on the handle. The internal locking mechanism gave way with a sickening crunch. The heavy stainless steel door swung open. A cloud of cold, preserved air rolled out, enveloping him. The barrier was gone. The vault was open. The heavy stainless steel door swung wide and a dense fog of sub-zero air rolled out into the warm kitchen. It carried the intoxicating scent of aged cheese-cured meats and expensive truffles. For a split second, the three of them just stood there, bathed in the white LED light of the open vault. They looked like explorers discovering a tomb of gold. Then the instinct took over, and the facade of civilized people dropped completely. They did not walk in. They lunged. Andre was the first to break the perimeter. He reached in with both hands and grabbed the vacuum-sealed logs of Kobe beef. He did not bother to check the labels or admire the marbling. He looked like a starving wolf that had finally cornered its prey. He ripped the plastic packaging open with his teeth, spitting the wrapper onto my clean floor. He threw the meat onto the counter with a wet slap. He turned on all 4 burners of my gas range to the highest setting. He did not season the meat. He did not let it rest. He threw 5 kilograms of the world's most expensive beef into a scorching hot pan. The kitchen immediately filled with the smoke of burning fat. He was not cooking, he was destroying. He seared the delicate meat until it was gray and rubbery, turning a culinary masterpiece into shoe leather. He ate it straight from the pan, burning his fingers, grease running down his chin. Brittany bypassed the food entirely. Her eyes were locked on the top shelf where the vintage wines were stored. She grabbed a bottle of Bordeaux that I had been saving for a 10th anniversary celebration. It was worth $500. She popped the cork and didn't even look for a wine glass. She grabbed a red plastic party cup from the pantry and filled it to the brim. She took a massive gulp, treating the aged vintage like it was cheap fruit punch. She laughed a loud, shrill sound as wine splashed out of the cup and stained my white marble countertop a deep, violent purple. Patricia was the most grotesque of all. She abandoned all pretense of being a refined lady. She sat on a stool right in front of the open fridge. She tore the lid off a jar of Osetra caviar. Instead of using a mother-of-pearl spoon, she used her bare fingers. She scooped the black eggs out and shoved them into her mouth, groaning with pleasure. She opened a wheel of brie cheese and bit into it like it was an apple. Crumbs of crackers and chunks of cheese fell from her mouth, landing on her lap and the floor. She did not care. She kicked the debris aside, grinding the food into the tile with her slippers. The kitchen became a chaotic symphony of chewing, slurping, and the clatter of dropped utensils. They did not speak to each other. They just consumed. They were making up for lost time, filling the void of their own insecurity with my hard-earned assets. They looked like vultures picking a carcass, clean oblivious to the fact that every bite they took was adding another zero to the bill they would never be able to pay. They were drunk on gluttony, and the thrill of the heist, completely unaware that the camera lens in the corner was capturing every single disgusting frame of their feast. What happened next was not just theft, it was a biological hazard. As a professional chef, I am trained to see invisible threats like bacteria and pathogens. Watching the security footage later was like watching a horror movie where the monster is microscopic but deadly. Andre stood at the counter holding the chef knife he had just used to slice the raw Wagyu beef. The blade was still coated in red meat juice and fat. Without walking to the sink, without even wiping the blade on a towel, he turned his attention to a pristine white box on the counter. Inside was a custom-ordered vanilla bean cheesecake topped with gold leaf intended for the bride's rehearsal dinner. Andre plunged the dirty meat-coated knife directly into the delicate dessert. He sawed through the crust, dragging raw beef fluids through the creamy white filling. In that 1 second, he committed a cardinal sin of the culinary world: cross-contamination. He had just introduced potential E. coli and salmonella into a ready-to-eat dessert. The entire cake was now poison. Brittany was no better. She was swaying slightly from the wine, holding a plastic fork she had found in a drawer. She pulled out a large container of prepped salad greens. These were expensive microgreens and heirloom spinach that had been washed-dried and sanitized. She leaned over the open container and felt a sneeze coming on. She did not turn her head. She did not cover her mouth with her elbow. She sneezed. A fine mist of saliva sprayed directly over the $300 worth of greens. Then she sniffled, wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and reached into the same container to grab a pinch of lettuce. My stomach churned watching it. In the eyes of the health department, my kitchen was no longer a workspace. It was a biohazard zone. Every single item they touched, every surface they breathed on was compromised. They were dipping their fingers into jars of olives and putting the lids back on. They were drinking directly from cartons of heavy cream. They were turning my inventory into a petri dish of bacteria. When they were finally full, when their stomachs could not hold another bite of stolen luxury, they decided to leave the scene of the crime. They stumbled out of the kitchen, leaving the lights on and the mess on the counters. But they made one final catastrophic mistake. Andre pushed the heavy stainless steel door of the fridge shut, but he did not check the latch. He did not hear the click. The heavy door bounced back slightly. It stayed open just a crack, barely an inch. But an inch is all it takes. The cold air that kept the remaining food safe began to bleed out into the warm kitchen. The warm air rushed in. The digital thermometer on the internal panel, which was now smashed but still recording data to the cloud, began to tick upward. 38 degrees, 40 degrees, 45 degrees. The food was entering the danger zone. The bacteria from their dirty hands and their sneezes began to multiply rapidly in the warming air. They had not just eaten a meal, they had destroyed the entire ecosystem of my business. I was sitting in a lecture hall in downtown Manhattan listening to a Michelin star chef discuss sustainable sourcing when my phone vibrated against my thigh. It was not a text message or a social media notification. It was a specific haptic pattern I had programmed for one thing only: a critical system alert. I slid the phone out of my pocket and looked at the screen. The notification was a bright red banner that read, "High Temperature Warning Zone 1." My heart did not race. I did not panic. I felt a cold wave of clarity wash over me. I excused myself from the seminar and walked into the quiet marble hallway. I opened the app for the commercial refrigeration unit. The data was damning. The internal temperature had risen from a perfect 38 degrees to 55 degrees in less than an hour. That kind of spike does not happen from a mechanical failure. It happens when the door is left wide open. I switched apps and opened the live security feed. The video loaded in high definition, and there it was, the crime scene. The kitchen was empty, but the evidence of their gluttony was everywhere. The massive stainless steel door of the vault was standing ajar, propped open by a discarded wine bottle. The heavy chain I had installed lay in a heap on the floor next to the broken pieces of the digital keypad. I could see the empty shelves where the Wagyu and the caviar used to be. My thumb hovered over Jason's contact information. The instinct to call him and scream was overwhelming. I wanted to demand an explanation. I wanted to hear him stutter and lie. But I stopped myself. If I called him now, he would panic. He would try to clean up the mess. He would throw away the ruined food and claim the fridge just broke. He would destroy the physical evidence before I could get there. I did not call my husband. Instead, I pressed the record button on the app, saving the live feed directly to my cloud storage. Then I dialed a different number. I called David, my corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring. "David, it is Nicole. Do not ask me how I know, but I need you to draft an eviction notice immediately. And I need you to prepare a civil suit for destruction of business property and theft. I am sending you the video evidence now. It involves family members, But do not treat it as a domestic dispute. Treat it as a break-in at my warehouse, because that is exactly what it is." David paused for a second and then simply said, "Understood." I hung up and opened the airline app. There was a flight leaving JFK for Chicago in 2 hours. A last-minute one-way ticket cost $600. I booked it without hesitation. I walked out of the conference center and hailed a cab. I was not going home to save my marriage. I was going home to execute a business decision. The silent alarm had done its job. They thought they were enjoying a secret feast, but they were actually dining in a trap, and I was coming home to close the door. By the 5th day, the kitchen did not smell like a 5-star restaurant anymore. It smelled like a dumpster behind a seafood market in the middle of July. The commercial fridge, which had been left cracked open by Andre's negligence, was no longer cooling. It was an incubator for rot. The expensive cheeses were sweating and molding. The remaining meat was turning gray and slimy, releasing a sickly sweet odor that permeated the entire first floor. The gluttony had turned into regret, but not the kind that leads to an apology. It was the kind that leads to a cover-up. Patricia sat at the island picking at a piece of stale, crusty bread. She looked at the devastation around her. There were empty wine bottles rolling on the floor. There were caviar tins used as ashtrays. The biometric lock hung from the door by a single wire, looking like a gouged eye. She knew I would be back eventually. And she knew that when I walked through that door, there would be hell to pay. But Patricia was a woman who had never taken accountability in her life. She did not see a crime scene. She saw an opportunity to control the narrative. She slammed her hand down on the counter, startling Brittany, who was scrolling through her phone trying to ignore the smell. "We cannot be here when she gets back," Patricia announced, her voice sharp and calculating. "If she finds this, she will kick us out. She will sue us. We need to get ahead of this." Andre looked up from the sofa where he was nursing a stomach ache caused by eating 3 pounds of rich food his body wasn't used to. "What are we going to do, Mom? We broke the lock. We ate the inventory. There is no hiding this." Patricia stood up and walked over to the broken fridge. She pointed at the chain lying on the floor. "Look at this, Andre. Look at what she did. She chained up the food. She put a military-grade lock on the refrigerator in a house where her elderly mother-in-law lives. Do you know what that looks like to a jury?" She turned to them with a wicked gleam in her eye. "It looks like abuse. It looks like neglect. She abandoned us here for a week without access to food. She starved us. We had to break in. It was a matter of survival." Brittany looked doubtful. "But Mom, we have money for Uber Eats, and there is a store down the street. Will the police believe we were starving?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Details, Brittany. The police do not care about Uber Eats. They care about an old woman fainting from hunger because her cruel daughter-in-law locked the pantry. We are going to call the police right now. We are going to file a report against her before she even lands in Chicago." She paced the room, working herself up into a frenzy of self-righteousness. She genuinely believed her own lies. In her mind, the fact that I owned the house and the food was irrelevant. She believed in the ancient law of family entitlement. She believed that because she was the matriarch, the world owed her sustenance, and anyone who withheld it was a criminal. "Call 911, she ordered, pointing at the landline. "Tell them we are victims of domestic abuse. Tell them she trapped us here. We are going to sue her for emotional distress and endangerment. By the time she gets home, she will be the one in handcuffs, not us." It was a plan born of pure delusion. She truly believed that the badge of motherhood would shield her from the laws of property and theft. She did not realize that by inviting the law into my house, she was signing her own eviction notice. But arrogance is blind, and Patricia was driving the car full speed toward a cliff. Patricia stood in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of her own gluttony. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was no longer the arrogant woman who had eaten caviar with her bare hands. She slumped her shoulders. She forced her hands to tremble. She summoned tears that welled up in her eyes with frightening speed. She was now playing the role of a lifetime, the frail, abandoned grandmother. She picked up the landline phone and dialed 911. She waited for the click. "Emergency services. What is your emergency?" Patricia let out a sob. It was a ragged, desperate sound that cracked perfectly. Please help me, she whispered into the receiver. Please send someone. I am starving. She left us here to die. The operator's voice sharpened instantly. Ma'am, are you injured? Who left you? My daughter-in-law. Patricia cried, her voice rising in hysteria. She went to New York. She locked all the food away. She put chains on the refrigerator. Chains like we are animals. I am 62 years old. I have a heart condition. I haven't eaten a real meal in 5 days. I am so weak I can barely stand. Andre and Brittany watched her from the kitchen island. Their mouths were slightly open. They were witnessing a masterclass in manipulation. Patricia sank to the floor, clutching the phone cord, twisting it around her fingers. She looked at the destroyed fridge door and the rotting meat, and she spun the narrative in real time. We had to break it open, she wailed. My son, he had to use a tool to break the lock just so I could get a piece of cheese. We were so desperate. But now I am afraid. She is coming back. She is going to be so angry that we touched her things. She is a monster. Please send someone. I don't feel safe in this house. On the other end of the line, the operator was typing furiously. The situation was escalating on her screen. The codes flashed red. Domestic disturbance, elderly female, potential unlawful confinement, neglect. In the eyes of the law, withholding food from a dependent is a felony. The operator did not know that Patricia was a healthy woman who had just consumed 5,000 calories of gourmet food. She only heard a terrified victim. Stay on the line, ma'am, the operator said, her voice soothing but firm. I have officers dispatching to your location right now. You are safe. Do not worry about the food. We will get you help. Patricia sniffled loudly. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. Please hurry. She hung up the phone and the transformation was instant. The tears evaporated. She stood up and smoothed down her dress. She looked at Andre and Brittany with a smug satisfaction. That, she said calmly, is how you handle a bully. The police are on their way. When they get here, remember the story. We were starving, we were scared, and we are the victims. In the distance, the faint wail of sirens began to rise. They were getting closer. Patricia walked over to the counter and swept some of the empty wine bottles into the trash to make the scene look less like a party and more like a desperate search for sustenance. She had just turned a crime scene into a rescue mission. She believed she had weaponized the police against me. She had no idea that by inviting the authorities into the house, she was inviting them to document the evidence of her own destruction. The red and blue lights of the police cruiser flashed through the front bay window, painting the living room in a chaotic rhythm of color. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting their belts and walking up the driveway with a sense of urgency. Inside the house, the stage was set. Patricia was lying on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket she had pulled from the linen closet. She made sure her hands were trembling visibly. Andre sat on the floor next to her, his head in his hands, looking like a man broken by circumstance. Brittany was pacing nervously, biting her nails. When the doorbell rang, Brittany ran to answer it. She threw the door open and stepped back, letting out a shaky breath. Officer Miller and his partner, Officer Davis, walked in, scanning the room for threats. They saw a 62-year-old woman looking pale and frail on the couch, and a large man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. They did not see the empty wine bottles hidden in the trash. They did not see the grease stains from the Wagyu beef on Andre's shirt. They only saw what Patricia wanted them to see. Officer Miller approached the sofa, kneeling down to eye level with Patricia. Ma'am, are you the one who called 911? Patricia nodded slowly, wiping a tear from her cheek. Yes, officer. Thank you for coming. We didn't know what else to do. We were trapped. She pointed a shaking finger toward the kitchen. The officers walked into the culinary war zone. They saw the massive commercial refrigerator standing open. They saw the heavy steel chain lying on the floor next to the shattered remains of the digital keypad. To their eyes, it did not look like a secured business asset. It looked like a prison cell door. Officer Davis whistled low. That is a serious piece of hardware for a home kitchen. Who put a chain on a refrigerator? My sister-in-law Brittany whispered from the doorway, hugging herself. She owns a catering business. She said the food was too expensive for us to eat. She went to New York 5 days ago and locked everything up. She took the keys. She didn't leave us any money for groceries. We tried to wait, officer. We really did. But Mom started getting dizzy. She has a heart condition. We had to break it open. We had to eat. Officer Miller looked at the broken lock and then back at the frail woman on the couch. His expression hardened. He saw a classic case of domestic abuse. In his mind, Nicole was a control freak who was weaponizing food to punish her family. He didn't know about the $4,000 grocery bills or the theft. He only saw a grandmother begging for help. He pulled out his notepad and clicked his pen. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. "You cannot lock elderly dependents away from basic sustenance. It falls under the neglect statutes." He began to write. The scratching of his pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. He recorded Patricia's statement verbatim. Victim states suspect Nicole left the premises for 5 days, securing all food sources with industrial locking mechanisms. Victim reports symptoms of malnutrition and distress. Forced entry was required for survival. Andre watched the officer write, and a flicker of relief crossed his face. They were buying it. The narrative was shifting. They were no longer thieves. They were survivors. Officer Miller ripped the page from his notebook and handed a card to Patricia. "We are going to file a report, ma'am. We will need to speak to this Nicole when she returns. But for now, do you need medical attention?" Patricia shook her head weakly. "No, just food. We just need to eat." The officers nodded sympathetically, completely unaware that the victims they were comforting had just consumed $20,000 worth of gourmet inventory. They walked out of the house, convinced they had just saved a family from a monster. The taxi pulled up to the curb behind the flashing lights of the police cruiser. I paid the driver and stepped out into the cool evening air. I smoothed down the lapels of my blazer and checked my reflection in the side mirror. I did not look like a frazzled housewife returning to a domestic disaster. I looked like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. Beside me, David, my corporate attorney, adjusted his silk tie and gripped the handle of his leather briefcase. We exchanged a single nod. We were not walking into a home. We were walking into a crime scene. I pushed the front door open and the smell hit me first. It was a rancid mix of stale wine, rotting meat, and the sickly sweet scent of Patricia's perfume. The living room was a tableau of calculated misery. Patricia was huddled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, clutching a bottle of water like it was a lifeline. Andre and Brittany stood near her, heads bowed, playing the part of traumatized survivors. When I stepped into the light, the energy in the room shifted violently. Patricia looked up. Her eyes, which had been filled with fake tears a moment ago, suddenly sharpened. She saw me and she smiled. It was a small, triumphant smirk hidden behind her water bottle. She thought she had won. She pointed a shaking finger at me and let out a theatrical gasp. "That is her," she croaked to the officers. "That is the woman who did this to us." Officer Miller, a large man with a buzz cut and a face set in stone, turned to face me. He saw a woman standing next to a suitcase while her elderly mother-in-law shivered on the couch. He made a snap judgment. He placed his hand on his belt near his handcuffs and took a step toward me, his body language aggressive and authoritative. "Ma'am, stay right there," he barked. "Put your bags down. We have received a distress call regarding elder neglect and unlawful confinement. You are looking at some very serious charges. I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back while we sort this out." I did not flinch. I did not drop my bag. I did not look at my family. I looked the officer dead in the eye with a calmness that unnerved him. "I am not doing anything of the sort. Officer," I said, my voice ice cold. "And before you touch me or ask me a single question, I suggest you look at the man standing to my right." David stepped forward, moving with the smooth, predatory grace of a shark in a $3,000 suit. He placed himself directly between me and the police officer. He held up a hand, not in surrender, but in command. "Good evening, Officer David," said his voice projecting clearly through the room. "I am David Sterling, representing Mrs. Nicole Vance and her corporation, Nicole's Table, LLC. My client will not be answering any questions without my presence. Furthermore, if you place a hand on her, you will be arresting the victim of a felony break-in and grand larceny." The officer blinked, confused by the sudden introduction of high-powered legal counsel in a suburban living room. Patricia's smile faltered for a second, but then returned. She looked at me with pure disdain. She believed that the police were on her side. She believed that no lawyer could overturn the narrative of a starving mother. She sat back on the couch and watched, waiting for the handcuffs to click around my wrists, confident that her performance was bulletproof. She had no idea that the play was over, and I had just rewritten the ending. Officer Miller hesitated, his hand hovering near his handcuffs. He looked from David's sharp suit to my calm face and then back to the sobbing woman on the couch. The narrative of the cruel daughter-in-law was starting to crack under the weight of professional legal intervention. I did not give him time to recover. I walked past him, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a rhythm that sounded like a gavel coming down. I did not look at Patricia. I walked straight to the wall adjacent to the pantry door. There, hanging in a discreet black frame, was a document that had been there for 3 years. It was not a decoration, it was a shield. "Officer," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "I need you to read this." Miller walked over, his brow furrowed. He squinted at the certificate. It was an official state-issued document stamped with the seal of the Department of Health and the Zoning Board. "This is a Class 1 commercial commissary license," I stated, pointing to the bold text. "This address is not just a residence. The kitchen area is zoned and licensed as a commercial food processing facility. It is subject to state health inspections, business insurance liabilities, and strict biosecurity protocols." I turned to face the room. My voice was no longer that of a family member. It was the voice of a CEO protecting her assets. The 3 people sitting on that couch do not have food handler permits. They have not passed a background check for access to sensitive inventory. They are not employees. In the eyes of the health department, they are unauthorized civilians. By breaking that lock and entering that temperature-controlled zone, they did not just steal dinner. They committed a biosecurity breach. David stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of files and handed them to the second officer. "Officer Davis, inside this file you will find the incorporation papers for Nicole's Table LLC, as well as the lease agreement, which clearly stipulates that the kitchen is a designated commercial zone exclusive to the business owner. You will also find the health code statutes regarding cross-contamination." He gestured toward Andre, who was still wiping grease from his mouth. "These individuals forced entry into a sterile environment. They introduced foreign contaminants. They compromised $20,000 of inventory intended for public consumption. This is not a domestic dispute about who ate the last slice of pizza. This is the destruction of commercial property and the violation of state health codes. If a random stranger broke into a restaurant and contaminated the food supply, you would arrest them. The law does not make an exception just because they share a last name." The room went dead silent. Patricia's fake sobbing stopped instantly. She looked at the certificate on the wall, and then at the police officers. She realized the ground had just shifted beneath her feet. She had called the police to report a mean relative. She had accidentally confessed to a corporate crime. Officer Miller looked at the broken lock on the floor, and then back at the license. His posture changed. He took his hand off his handcuffs and pulled out his notepad again, flipping to a fresh page. The look of sympathy on his face vanished, replaced by the cold, hard look of a man processing a crime scene. David placed a heavy black binder on the coffee table. The thud it made against the wood was the only sound in the room. The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia stopped her fake shivering. Andre wiped his greasy hands on his jeans. Brittany looked from the lawyer to the police officers, her eyes wide with a dawning realization that the game had changed. David opened the binder with slow, deliberate movements. He pulled out a spreadsheet that was color-coded in red. He turned it toward Officer Miller and Officer Davis. "Gentlemen, what you are looking at is not a grocery list." David began, his voice smooth and clinical. "This is a forensic accounting of the assets contained within the commercial unit prior to the breach. It includes the purchase price, the shipping manifests, and the current market value of rare imported goods." He pointed to the first column. "Here we have 20 pounds of A5 Wagyu beef, imported from Hyogo Prefecture. Current market value $3,000. Below that, 4 tins of Almas caviar." $8,000. The white truffles from Alba, $5,000. The vintage wines, $4,000. Officer Miller looked at the list, his eyebrows raising. He looked at Andre, who was suddenly finding the floor very interesting. But David continued, his voice hardening. The cost of the consumed food is actually the least of their problems. You see, when these individuals forced the door open, they did not just eat lunch, they destroyed the integrity of the entire unit. David pulled out a graph printed on thick, glossy paper. It showed a red line spiking upward. This is the temperature log from the digital sensors inside the unit. At 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday, the seal was broken. The door was left ajar. The internal temperature rose from 38 degrees to 60 degrees within 2 hours. In the food safety industry, we call this the danger zone. Bacteria multiplies exponentially at these temperatures. He turned to the officers with a look of grave seriousness. Because of this negligence, every single item in that fridge, even the items they did not touch, is now considered biohazardous waste. I cannot serve it to a client. I cannot donate it to a shelter. I cannot even take it home. By law, I must pay a hazardous waste disposal team to come and remove it. The entire inventory is a total loss. He tapped the bottom of the spreadsheet where a number was circled in thick black ink. The replacement cost of the inventory plus the emergency rush shipping fees to fulfill the client's contract for next week, plus the disposal fees, brings the total damages to $28,500. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Patricia gasped. It was a real gasp this time. She clutched her chest. $28,000. That was more than the value of her car. That was more than she had ever seen in her bank account at one time. That is a lie, she shrieked, her voice cracking. It is just food. It is just meat and cheese. You cannot charge us $28,000 for a snack. You are trying to scam us, officer. She is lying. I stepped forward then. I did not raise my voice. I simply pulled my iPad from my bag. I do not need to lie. Patricia, I said softly, I have proof. I unlocked the screen and opened the video file labeled Evidence. I handed the tablet to Officer Miller. You wanted to know how they got in, I said. You wanted to know if they were starving victims or calculated criminals. Watch this. I pressed play. The video was crystal clear. It showed Andre walking into the kitchen. He did not look weak. He did not look like he was fainting from hunger. He looked strong. He looked angry. He was holding the massive red bolt cutters. The officers watched in silence as the video showed Andre positioning the blades around the lock. They watched the violence of his movements. They saw him straining his muscles not out of desperation, but out of rage. They heard the snap of the metal. They saw him attack the digital keypad with the screwdriver. They watched him rip the electronics out of the wall with a savagery that made Officer Davis flinch. Then they watched the aftermath. They saw the three of them lunging into the fridge. They saw Andre throwing the raw meat onto the stove. They saw Brittany drinking directly from the bottle. They saw Patricia eating with her hands wiping grease on the furniture. It was not a scene of survival. It was a scene of looting. I paused the video on a frame where Andre was tearing into the beef with his teeth, the bolt cutters lying at his feet like a murder weapon. Officer Miller looked up from the screen. His face was pale. The sympathy he had felt 10 minutes ago was gone, completely incinerated by the high-definition reality of what he had just seen. This is not a civil dispute anymore, officer, I said, my voice steady. This is vandalism. This is destruction of commercial property. And given the value of the assets destroyed, this is grand larceny. In this state, anything over $1,000 is a felony. We are looking at 28 times that limit. David stepped in, closing the binder with a final snap. My client is pressing full charges against all three individuals. We are filing for immediate restitution of the $28,500, and we are requesting that they be removed from the premises immediately as they pose a verified threat to the business and the homeowner. Patricia looked at the officers, her eyes darting around the room looking for an escape route. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The victim narrative had disintegrated. She was not a helpless old woman anymore. She was an accomplice to a felony. Officer Miller handed the iPad back to me. He adjusted his belt and turned slowly toward the sofa. His hand moved to his radio. "Dispatch," he said into his shoulder mic, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We are going to need a second unit at this location. We have a confirmed 459 commercial burglary and felony vandalism. Suspects are on scene." Andre stood up, his legs shaking. "Wait, hold on. We are family. You cannot arrest family for eating dinner." Officer Miller looked at him with cold eyes. "You didn't eat dinner, son. You broke into a business and destroyed 30 grand worth of property. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest." The atmosphere in the living room shifted instantly from a domestic welfare check to a felony crime scene investigation. Officer Miller's face hardened into a mask of professional indifference. The pity he had felt for the weeping grandmother evaporated the moment he saw the video of Andre wielding bolt cutters like a weapon. He was no longer dealing with a family dispute. He was dealing with a calculated break involving significant commercial assets. He took a step toward Andre, his hand resting on his service belt. "Sir, I am not going to ask you again. Stand up, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Andre blinked, looking from his mother to the officer. "Wait, you can't be serious. This is my brother's house. I live here. You can't arrest me for opening a fridge in my own house." Officer Miller grabbed Andre's arm and spun him around with practiced efficiency. "It does not matter where you sleep, son. You were caught on tape using industrial tools to bypass a security system and destroy property that does not belong to you. That is a felony." He pulled Andre's wrists together. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the silent room. Click, click, cold and final. Andre let out a grunt of pain and shock. "Mom, do something! Tell them!" Patricia exploded. She leaped off the sofa, shedding her blanket and her fake frailty in a split second. Her face turned purple with rage. "Get your hands off my son!" She screamed, lunging toward the officer before David stepped in to block her path. "This is illegal. You cannot arrest him. She is my daughter-in-law. We are family. Everything in this house is community property. The food is ours. The fridge is ours. You cannot steal from your own family." Officer Davis stepped forward, his voice cutting through her hysteria like a knife. "Ma'am, take a step back, or you will be joining him in the back of the cruiser for obstruction of justice." He pointed to the framed license on the wall, and then to the binder on the table. "You seem to be confused about the law, ma'am. This is not a communal pantry. The food inside that unit is the sole property of Nicole's Table Limited Liability Company. It is a separate legal entity." He looked her up and down with a look of absolute disdain. "I have reviewed the corporate filing. I see Nicole Vance listed as the sole proprietor. I do not see your name on the shareholder list. I do not see your son's name on the deed to the business. Therefore, you have zero claim to those assets. You are not family in the eyes of the law right now. You are unauthorized trespassers who destroyed a business." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She looked at me, expecting me to crumble to apologize to save them. But I just stood there next to my lawyer, watching the consequences finally catch up to the entitlement. The officer turned Andre toward the door and began marching him out. The illusion of their power had shattered completely, leaving only the cold, hard reality of the penal code. The front door slammed shut, cutting off Andre's protests as Officer Miller escorted him to the patrol car. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the foyer. Brittany collapsed onto the floor, weeping into her hands. She crawled toward me, clutching the hem of my pants like a beggar. "Please, Nicole," she sobbed. "You have to stop them. He has a record. If he gets a felony, he goes away for a long time. Please just tell them it was a misunderstanding. We will pay you back. I swear." I stepped back, pulling my leg away from her grasp. I did not look down at her. I looked across the room at the man who was supposed to be my partner. Jason was pressed against the banister, trying to blend into the woodwork. His face was pale, his eyes darting between his weeping sister and the police officer standing guard. He had said nothing. He had done nothing. I walked over to him, my heels clicking on the hardwood. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I slapped it against his chest. He flinched, grabbing it reflexively. What is this? Jason stammered. Those are divorce papers, I said, my voice low and lethal. They are already signed and notarized. And right now you are holding your future in your hands. I stepped closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. You have two choices, Jason. Option 1. You sign those papers. We sell the house. We split the assets. But because you violated the prenuptial agreement by allowing the destruction of my business inventory, I will sue you for breach of contract. You will leave this marriage with $0 and a mountain of debt. You will be homeless just like them. Jason's eyes widened in terror. He looked at the envelope, trembling. Or I continued option 2. You grow a spine. You stand up right now, and you give a witness statement to Officer Davis. You tell him exactly what you saw. You tell him that you warned them not to touch the fridge. You confirm that they broke in against your will, and then you tell your mother and your sister to get out of my house immediately. Jason looked at Patricia, who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. She expected him to save her. She expected him to be the dutiful son. Jason, help me, she whispered. Tell her to stop. Jason looked at his mother. Then he looked at the divorce papers. Then he looked around the beautiful, expensive house that he could never afford on his own salary. The calculation in his eyes was visible. He was a coward, and cowards always choose self-preservation. He took a deep breath and turned to Officer Davis. Officer, Jason said, his voice shaking but distinct. I want to make a statement. My wife is telling the truth. I told them not to touch the fridge. I heard them breaking the lock. They did it on their own. Patricia let out a scream of betrayal that curdled the blood. You liar! You ungrateful little rat! Jason didn't stop. He turned to his mother, refusing to make eye contact. And Mom, you have to go. You and Brittany, you can't stay here tonight. You need to pack your things and leave, now. I watched him throw his own family to the wolves to save his lifestyle. It was pathetic, but it was exactly what I needed. The alliance was broken. The eviction had begun. 3 months later, the silence in the house was the first thing I noticed every morning. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of walking on eggshells around ungrateful guests. It was the crisp, clean silence of absolute ownership. Across town, the reality for the Vance family was very different. The court system had not been kind to Andre. He avoided prison time by pleading guilty to a lesser charge of criminal mischief, but the judge slapped him with 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. He was currently spending his weekends picking up trash on the side of the highway, wearing a neon orange vest that matched his humiliation. His wages at the warehouse job he was forced to take were being garnished every week to pay back the $28,000 he owed me. Patricia and Brittany had fallen even harder. With no income and a mountain of legal debt, they were forced to move into a 300-square-foot studio apartment in a neighborhood where police sirens were the nightly lullaby. There was no room for a vanity table, let alone a squad brunch. Brittany had to sell her designer handbags on eBay just to pay the deposit. They were eating instant noodles for real this time, not as a punishment from me, but because it was all they could afford. They had turned on each other, of course. They spent their days bickering in that tiny room, blaming each other for the downfall of their imaginary empire. And then there was Jason. Poor, calculating Jason. He thought that by throwing his mother and brother under the bus that night, he had saved his marriage. He thought I would be grateful that he finally chose a side. He was wrong. I served him the divorce papers the very next morning. I looked him in the eye and told him that I could not sleep next to a man who had to be threatened with bankruptcy to do the right thing. I bought out his share of the equity with the profits from the Vanderwall wedding contract he almost ruined. He left the house with a suitcase and a check, looking just as pathetic as the day he hid in his headphones. I stood in the center of my kitchen. It had been completely remodeled. The scarred cabinets were gone, replaced by sleek, modern shelving. The commercial fridge was gone, replaced by a custom walk-in pantry with a glass door that didn't need a chain because there were no thieves left to steal from me. The doorbell rang. It was soft and melodic. I checked the monitor. It was the editorial team from Bon Appetit magazine. They were here to interview the owner of the city's fastest-growing catering company. I wiped a smudge of flour from the granite island and checked my reflection in the stainless steel range hood. I did not look tired. I did not look angry. I walked to the door to let them in. The air smelled of fresh basil and roasting garlic. It smelled like success. I opened the door and greeted the photographer with a smile. It wasn't a polite smile or a customer service smile. It was the smile of a woman who had burned the bridge and built a castle on the other side. I was finally absolutely free. The saga of Nicole and the Vance family serves as a brutal but necessary masterclass in the importance of boundaries. We are often taught that family requires unconditional support, but this story illustrates the dangerous difference between helping a loved one and enabling a parasite. Nicole's initial patience was not met with gratitude. It was met with an escalating sense of entitlement. The lesson here is that generosity, when extended to those who lack self-awareness, is viewed not as a gift, but as a limitless resource to be exploited. Furthermore, the story highlights the vital necessity of treating one's own livelihood with respect. Nicole succeeded because she stopped viewing the theft as a family squabble and started viewing it as a business liability. By detaching emotionally and relying on fax security footage, invoices, and legal statutes, she dismantled their manipulation. She proved that family is not a magic word that grants immunity from the law or basic decency. Ultimately, the most powerful takeaway is that self-preservation is not an act of cruelty. Keeping the peace is never worth the price of your own sanity or financial stability. Nicole's decision to divorce a cowardly husband and evict toxic in-laws was not an act of revenge. It was an act of self-respect. Her story reminds us that you cannot build a successful future while you are busy funding the destruction caused by people who do not respect you. True freedom begins the moment you realize that access to your life, your home, and your energy is a privilege, not a right. If you have ever had to draw a hard line to protect your peace or your business from toxic entitlement, share your story in the comments below. Let's discuss the art of setting boundaries.